As RS3 players, when we think about skill expression, we usually consider top tier PVM as the absolute pinnacle of player accomplishments. And yeah, pushing Zamorak to 16,000% in Rage is definitely an achievement. What if I said there was another activity that should be considered equally as difficult as top tier PVM in terms of skill expression? Here's an unlikely candidate for you. Elite clue scrolls. This is why elite clue scrolls need to be considered some of the hardest content in the game. Let's go. Let's take it from the top for the people that don't know what an elite clue scroll is. Elite clue scrolls were added to the game on the 4th of August 2010 and are the starting point for the treasure trails distraction and diversion activity. Treasure trails are a pretty simple concept to get your head around. They're basically a treasure hunt where you explore Gillinor, solve some puzzles, and then eventually you get some loot at the end of it. In true Runescape fashion, that loot can range from a couple thousand GP to over 9 billion GP. For the old school players out there, that's the equivalent of about half a twisted bow. That's a pretty decent chunk of money for an item that's basically a cosmetic with its price propped up by its rarity. But I digress. Elite clue scrolls are technically the 4th hardest out of the 5 possible clue scroll difficulties, and I say technically here for a good reason. They're actually a lot harder to complete than the average master clue scroll, which is supposed to be the hardest difficulty. That sounds super weird, I know, but hear me out on this one. Alright, so here's the basic need to knows for cracking elite treasure trails. There's 4 major puzzle steps that form the basis for the skills needed to do these efficiently. You'll also need to use the Alt1 plugin, which is going to assist you with these steps. The steps are as follows. Number 1. Compass clues. The compass points to the location of your next clue step, which could be anywhere on the surface of Gillinor. Simply follow where the compass points and it'll take you right there. At number 2, we've got scan clues. The clue scroll will direct you to a location. Then you've got to run around that location, scanning for the next clue scroll step. Once you're in close enough proximity to the step, it'll light up, then you can run over and grab it. Number 3, the infamous sliding puzzle box. Simply slide the pieces around to your pictures in the correct order, then you can open the box for the next step. Lastly, at number 4, we've got the Celtic knot puzzle box. You'll need to slide the knots around till the runes line up with each other. Once they're in the right order, the puzzle box will open. Now you know a bit more about the steps, you're probably thinking, wow, that doesn't seem so bad. How on earth is that comparable to doing Zamorak at 16,000%? Well, that's a really good question, and the truth is, it isn't that hard. Assuming you want to do a maximum of 4 elite clue scrolls an hour, that would take you about 2,500 hours to hit that big ticket 3rd age die you've got your eyes on. That's not very efficient, is it? Well, good thing we're RS3 players, because we found ways to min-max the ever-living shit out of the janky mess that is elite treasure trails. Forget 4 elites an hour, how about you get good and just do 20 an hour? How does that sound? Borderline impossible? Yeah, I thought so too for a long time. There's players out there with enough skill that can crank out 20 elite treasure trails an hour minimum, consistently. And that's without puzzle skip tickets, bear in mind. We'll touch on that later though. So how exactly do we go from a 4 clue scroll Fred to a 20 clue scroll Terry? Simply put, taking advantage of the really high skill ceiling. Let's dig a bit deeper on that. This is why elite clue scrolls are so difficult to do efficiently. Alright, so here we go with number 1. The randomness of clue steps requires quick, accurate decision making to do efficiently. Elite clue scrolls have randomly generated steps from a pool of hundreds of different options, which means every single clue scroll you do is going to be different from the last one. This means that pretty often you'll be making adjustments on the spot to figure out the most efficient way of doing the next step. When your inventory looks like this and you have 3 spell books worth of teleports to choose from, if you're an inexperienced clue scroll runner, you're going to find yourself overwhelmed pretty quickly. And unfortunately, the only way to get better at this is by just doing more clue scrolls. Over time, you'll figure out which clue scroll steps connect to each other really well and don't require teleports to move between, and you'll have all of your hotkeys committed to muscle memory, allowing you to quickly navigate teleport item menus without even thinking about it. As soon as Alt1's flash the location of where you gotta go, you'll already be on the way. While fundamentally this sounds easy, I can assure you this is incredibly difficult to do quickly and requires massive amounts of practice to be able to consistently do elite clue scrolls within 3 minutes. 3 minutes really isn't a long time, so if it takes you 10 seconds to figure out how to move to your next clue step, you're going to be losing entire clue scrolls over the course of an hour. If you weren't convinced by that one, here's another example of how randomness makes elite clue scrolls so difficult. Let's say you've just picked up a compass clue scroll step. Alt1's going to use your location and the direction of the compass to point a line over all the possible clue scroll steps the next step could be. Less experienced clue scroll runners will go for a teleport to help triangulate the location more accurately. Instead, an experienced clue scroll runner might already know the location they've got to go to based on past experience. They'll have to think quickly to consider all the possible options, then choose the best one. Being right about this is a huge time save. Being wrong about this is a huge time loss, so you'll need to know which combination of steps can be solved without that extra triangulation. This requires a ton of practice to process quickly, and further reinforces that the randomness of elite clue scrolls really pushes that skill ceiling up. Here's number 2, and everyone's favourite part about elite clue scrolls: puzzle boxes. Having to do a sliding puzzle almost every single clue scroll step is an absolute nightmare. They're basically hard time gates, restricted by how fast you can crank up the Alt1 slide puzzle solver and still be able to click the tiles without messing up. For reference, the default slide puzzle solver intervals or about 1 second, and the average slide puzzle has about 130 steps required to finish it, which in itself is going to take about 2 minutes. With some bad luck, you could end up with up to 7 slide puzzle steps in a row, effectively time gating you for 14 minutes unless you get good. On the other hand, we've got seriously talented clue scroll runners that have pushed their intervals down to 0.13 seconds, which is about 90% quicker than the default, meaning a good player can crack these puzzle boxes in less than 20 seconds. I'll let the math speak for itself. If that ain't a high skill ceiling, I don't know what is. Basically, the only way you can accomplish these paces is by slowly decreasing the interval speed as you get comfortable at the speed you're on. It goes without saying, it's going to take a lot of practice to reduce the time it takes you to do slide puzzle steps by 90%. From personal experience, it took me over 400 elite clue scrolls to go from 0.75 interval down to 0.24. That works out to be over 30 hours of elite clue scroll solving to not even get close to that pace. It's important to remember that those speed increases get exponentially more difficult to deal with the more you decrease the intervals. This is even more insane when you consider that it takes about 100 milliseconds for the brain to even process that a visual stimulus has occurred, and hasn't even started to calculate how to react before the next stimulus is received. This effectively means that by the time the brain has received the first visual stimulus and converted that into a motor function, in this case a drag and click, the box has already moved 3 times, as it can take up to 400 milliseconds to enact a motor function. Training your brain to process specific information like this so quickly is incredibly difficult to do. Wow, would you look at that? It's that high skill ceiling again. Following that, I want to give an honourable mention to Celtic knot puzzle boxes. While they're definitely not as hard as the slide puzzle boxes, it can be really difficult to click your mouse just the right amount of times to line all the knots up, especially if you get a big number like 8 or 10 slides. In fact, you can test this out right now if you like. If you're enjoying the video, try spam clicking the like button exactly 9 times as fast as you can. See? It ain't that easy, is it? Jesus, who lets this guy write his own scripts? It's a fucking disaster every video, goddamn. So, yeah, back to the point. Puzzle box hard. On to the next reason elite clue scrolls are so difficult. Here's number 3, and my absolute favourite part about elite clue scrolls: effective use of movement abilities. In most cases, you can close distances a lot faster with movement abilities than you would with running, and there is a lot of running involved with elite clue scrolls, especially on area scans. This means that players that know how to utilise their movement abilities effectively will be able to move between steps a lot quicker than someone that doesn't know how to do that. Here's a side-by-side of a clue scroll step using movement abilities and without using movement abilities. It's very clear to see which one of those is faster. You'll be looking at a massive effect size over the course of 50 or 60 clue steps in an hour. I really want to slam this one home, so I'm going to say it again. Seconds turn into minutes over the course of an hour, especially on elite clue scroll running. The learning curve of effective movement ability use while running clue scrolls is absolutely massive. A player that's new to this is going to be burning their valuable cooldowns surging 2 tiles into rocks and trees, while the more experienced player knows exactly when to use which abilities to cover the most ground as quickly as possible. And unfortunately, the only way to get good at this is just by doing clue scrolls more. This one feels a little bit less bad than practicing slide puzzles though, at least you haven't got to stop and reload everything every time you make a mistake. Surging face first, 1 tile at a time into every obstacle possible does just happen. Yeah, you'll learn to love it eventually. Or I did at least. Once you start getting better with your movement abilities, it feels absolutely amazing. And this is a skill that applies just about everywhere in the game. Even elite tier PVMs can benefit from learning how to use their movement abilities well. The good news is you don't even have to be doing elite clue scrolls to practice this. Give it a go next time you're doing some herb runs, or running from wars retreat to the next boss instance. You'll start noticing the results pretty quick. Trust me, you'll love it. Here we go with the last one, which is being able to do scan clues effectively. While they don't have the highest skill ceiling by themselves, they combine movement abilities with having to know where you're going and improvise on the spot. For most scan clues, there is a most effective path that you'd follow to do them as quickly as possible, but this gets turned on its head when you get a big ping early on in the route, which in simple terms means you know the clue isn't at the end of the route. It's somewhere near where you are right now. Getting an early ping effectively means you've been given the opportunity to save a lot of time, but only if you can capitalize on it. Deviating from the route to pick up a time save and running to the wrong location is a massive time loss, and that'll happen quite regularly for players that are still learning how the pings work. So this is where we see the massive skill ceiling come in again. Depending on your current location and the color ping you get, some players can already tell exactly where they've got to go. Once again, the only way to do this consistently is by just doing a lot of clue scrolls and getting very familiar with all the possible steps. Given that there's an absolute ton of different scan locations you can end up with, and a huge amount of possible steps within each of those locations, it's going to take a huge amount of repetition to get that to actually stick in your brain. Understanding how the pings work in Elite and Master clue scrolls is incredibly complicated. It would easily take me an entire video to explain to you how these actually work, and can be used to speed up scan steps. And that becomes even more difficult when you throw effective use of movement abilities on top of it. Being able to juggle 2 complicated tasks like that at the same time takes a lot of practice, and it really brings the skill ceiling of Elite clue scrolls to the next level. Here's a quick summary of all the points we just covered there in case you forgot. That was a lot of talking. I don't expect you to remember all that. But now if you do forget, you haven't got an excuse. So I hope you're all taking notes. But back to the point. Those are some of the reasons why I think that elite clue scroll speedrunning needs to be considered some of the hardest content in the game. I think it's fair to say that many players absolutely despise elite clue scrolls. The GP per hour is absolutely terrible until you pull a big ticket item, and the clue steps for many players are just unreasonably difficult to get good at. And it's because of those reasons I want to show some respect to the absolute maniacs that took the time to get good at elite clue scrolls. I'm far from being an expert on doing elite clue scrolls efficiently, so if I've got anything wrong or I've missed something, please let me know in the comments. I'll see you in the next video. Please consider liking and subscribing if you've enjoyed the content.